Shalom, Bethel family. It's Thursday, time for another week of Torah talk. These are based on my comments from synagogue this past Saturday and on the Parshat Vayechi, the last Parsha in the book of Genesis, the book of Bereshit. And let me start by saying last week I was away for several days at a learning conference known as RTI, a wonderful chance for rabbis to get together and to learn Torah together just for the sake of learning Torah, not something, unfortunately, we get to do as often as we might like. And I was on my way home, and I heard this song that I love. It's a great, great song, but it also made me feel a little melancholy. I remember that when I first discovered the song, I was eager to share it with my father. My dad was never a big music person, and I don't know that he had a favorite song. But it turns out when I brought him this song, it might have been his least favorite song. So I remember I played it for him. I said, have you ever heard this song? It's about fathers, and it's beautiful, and I wanted to play it for you. And he said, yeah, yes, Jeffrey, I know the song, but I don't like it very much. The music is lovely, but it hits a little too close to home. So what was the song? Cats in the Cradle by Harry Chapin. Hopefully you are familiar with the song, and you know that it's beautiful, but it's about this man who doesn't have enough time for his son when his son is little, and his son grows up, and now his son doesn't have enough time for him. You know, I'm a father myself now, and I can't help but feel a little bit convicted every time I hear that song. Now, I must tell you, because it wouldn't be fair to my father if I didn't, that my dad was a great father, and I couldn't have asked more from him, even still, than he gives me. Yes, he worked long hours at his pharmacy. He was away a lot of the time, but I understood and understand that through all of those long hours, my sister and I were still on his mind and in his heart. He was working to provide for us. And yet, even knowing that is true, I understand why he didn't like the song, because now I'm a father, and it's my turn to squirm whenever I hear it. It's not so much about what our kids think, but how we feel about how we divide our time and if we could be doing it differently. So listening to Cats in the Cradle this week did not only remind me of my father, it also reminded me of the father of our people, Jacob. In this week's Torah portion, we read about Jacob's last days. Right? His sons all come and gather around him, presumably for him to give each of them a blessing. He's come to the end of his life. But as the commentaries point out, he doesn't exactly give them blessings. Particularly his oldest three sons get what most of us would call a curse rather than a blessing. So what are we to learn from this awkward scene at the end of Jacob's life, at the end of the book of Genesis? All these sons gathered around waiting to hear their father's last words to them, and he lashes out seemingly in anger and resentment, holding a grudge over his oldest three sons for all of these years. Well, I think that our ancestor is actually trying to teach a very important lesson here. In fact, it's the very same lesson that we learn from Cats in the Cradle. The lesson is that whatever we put into the world, we are going to receive back in kind. That's why Reuben, Shimon, and Levi don't get what we would call a blessing. It's not that Jacob is wishing them ill for their futures based on their past offenses against him. Rather, this is a prediction of what their futures will bring based on the nastiness that they put into the world. Right? Jacob is telling all of his sons that the energy and actions that they put into the world will come back to them as sure as a boomerang. And who better to teach this lesson than Jacob? He spends his earlier life as a trickster. He cons his brother out of his birthright. He tricks his father into giving him his brother's blessing. And then he runs off to live with his uncle Laban. and there gets into this sort of trick for trick relationship with him, this competition. And for all of his sly trickery, for all that he gets what he wants with his con games and his manipulations, what does he get for putting that into the world? He gets duped himself, time and time again. Right? We see it with his father-in-law, right, who switches Leah for Rachel when he goes to get married that first time. We see it with his father-in-law who tricks him into working 21 years for nearly no compensation. And of course, we see it with his sons who trick him into thinking that his favorite son, Joseph, is dead by taking his coat and dipping it in goat's blood when they send him off into slavery. In this Parsha, when Jacob comes to meet Pharaoh, he's a bitter, bitter man. And no wonder, based on the story that I just told. Right? He's brought before Pharaoh, right? Joseph wants him to meet his boss, wants him to meet this great king who is now going to allow them to reside in his land. And Pharaoh says, "Oh, nice to meet you. How are you?" And what does Jacob reply? "My life has been difficult, and my years have not as been many as my father's." Right? He's suffered from his actions. He's gotten back from the universe what he put into it, and he now realizes that he has the opportunity to teach his sons to do things differently. And Jacob is not only teaching his sons this important lesson, he is teaching each of us this lesson. Because Jacob's role is much more than only being a father to his own children. He is our ancestor. It's a very powerful word, ancestor. What does it mean to be an ancestor? Well, it means that by Jacob's example, even with all the difficulties in his life up until this point, he's using this last act in his life to teach a lesson based on what he learned from his own experiences. And thereby he puts his wisdom into the world to ensure his positive role as an ancestor, right? Not just as a father, but for generations to come. Because that's what it means to be an ancestor. It means putting goodness into the world, not only in the hopes that we receive it back in kind from the universe, but because we know that we can plant a positive seed for the future, and it is our responsibility to leave a legacy of positivity. At some point in our lives, we need to stop seeing ourselves as the result of human history, right? That all of the history of humanity up until this point was leading up to this moment, was leading up to me. And it's for me to enjoy everything out there. At some point, our perspective needs to change. And we realize we are not the culmination of history. We are a link in a chain from the deep past into the future. And we have the opportunity to be an ancestor, to be one who puts positivity into that chain, to see it come to fruition for who knows how long. I mean, Jacob lived 3,500 years ago or so, and we still are learning from our ancestor, Jacob. When we speak about ancestors, when we speak about Jacob himself, it is not only about the actual children he put into the world, but it's about his teachings and his approach to living and the impact he had on all those around him. In Judaism, when we talk about giving a blessing, we are also talking about something greater than simply the lessons and the blessings we give to our own children. Perhaps the idea is best encapsulated in a wedding teaching that was taught by one of my colleagues that I discovered in Ron Wolfson's book, The 7 Questions You're Asked in Heaven. In it, Ron quotes Rabbi Ed Feinstein, who apparently would say at a wedding when the kids or the bride and the groom were about to sign the ketubah, he would say, "You are surrounded by your friends and family who love you, who raised you, and who brought you to this moment. But from now on, you are no longer only a descendant. From now on, you have the potential to be an ancestor." We are all capable of being an ancestor, capable of being the blessing, not only for this generation and not only for our children's generation, but for the future. And so as we close the pages of Genesis, of Bereshit, for this this go around, this year's reading, and we turn to Shemot and begin to read the history of our people in Egypt and the story of Moses, I think it's incumbent on all of us to reflect. How will we be an ancestor? How will we rise above this moment in history and ensure that in the future there will be better ones, not only for us, not only for our children, but for their children and their children beyond them? It all starts with how we approach the world, what lessons we teach, and how we embrace our role as ancestor. May we all find a great way, a beautiful way to do that in our own lives. And I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.